Welcome to the College Checklist podcast by March Consulting College Planning and Higher Scores Test Prep, where we make the confusing chaos of the college admissions process simple. As we enter a new era of testing and admissions, we're bringing you a new guide to application season with a whole new team of experts and guests. Today, you have me, Christina, your resident admissions expert, here to talk with a special guest about everything you need to know for college application season. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Kat Klaus. Welcome, Kat. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Of course. So thank you for having me. I'm actually the owner and CEO of March Consulting. We review over, I would say, 450 applications a season. We've helped over 700 students through the admissions process successfully to colleges that are great fits for them. And our students are doing amazing things all over the US. Really excited to be a part of the podcast and to be talking about this kind of exciting time in a student's life.
We're so grateful to have you. Thank you so much for making time with us today. We're going to be giving you kind of a bird's eye view of the admissions process from start to finish with some general tips on when you should be anticipating certain aspects and what you can be working on in advance. But please know that there is so much more to be aware of, so much more to learn about each individual school and their individual application process. So, this is a really great starting point, and it will help you become aware of where you want to spend some more time and attention learning more going forward. So, first, let's discuss a bit of the timeline. Let's start with when applications even open, because there are some that you do not have access to before a certain date. So you can't be working in them any sooner. It's good to know as soon as they do become available, because the sooner you get started, the sooner you can move on with your life at the end of this process. So let's talk about some of the main applications that students are using to apply to their schools across the country, starting with the Common App. Over 800 plus private schools, out of state schools use this application system, and it will be available to students sooner than August 1st, except for the fact that the school specific questions in there will roll over. They'll end from one cycle and update to the next right around August 1st. So while there are pieces that you can be working in sooner, you won't know for sure what that new year's essay questions are or what the exact questions that the school is using in the application are until after August 1st when they've done their big rollover, and you'll get some emails warning you about that leading up to that day. August 1st is also a big day because the UC application here for the California system opens that same day as well. So students can't be working in this one any sooner. August 1st is the first day that they can create their account and begin completing the sections in there. Speaking of California systems, the Cal State system application does not become available until October 1st. So that is a couple months after the UC. It might feel like you're having to wait to start that application after you've been working on others, but it is a bit more simple compared to the Common App, compared to the UC app. You're not writing activity descriptions, you're not writing essays. So it's okay that they make you wait a bit longer to get started in that one because you'll have it finished sooner as well. And then throughout these key applications, there's lots of other systems like standalone applications or the Texas system, and they're going to have their own individual deadlines throughout August leading on. MIT's application becomes available about mid September each year. So again, you want to look into the specifics of the schools that you know that you're applying to so that you can be sure of these opening dates as they will vary. One of the additional requirements that applications often include are letters of recommendation from teachers and mentors and grown-ups in your life that can speak to your qualities and your standout traits. The timeline for this is interesting because we want to have those letters received by the writers by the school's application deadline. So that means we have to get other people to do things for us by a certain deadline, and that can be tricky. We want to be respectful. We want to make sure they get the time that they need to write you a really quality letter. And then we also want to make sure that they get it submitted so that you don't need to worry anymore about whether or not it will reach its destination by a deadline. So, a good time to start on this is really the end of your junior year. That would be a good time to be having conversations with the teachers that you're planning on using. It would be a good time to be providing them information that they can use to draft that letter for you. The Common App rollover on August 1st, however, is when you want to get into that system and actually enter those recommenders' emails, get them programmed into the schools that you're applying to. So maybe you're talking about it at the end of your junior year. You're giving your writers that summer's worth of heads up and time to be working on their materials. But by August 1st, you can be sending off emails that are giving those writers their instructions for what to do next. And you can even be seeing that those letters have been received in September, well ahead of some of the earliest deadlines that you may have. And this is a good idea to be doing because you never know what kinds of things can come up. We have had students with well meaning teachers who meant to get their letters in by a deadline get assigned to months long jury duty or go on maternity leave rather suddenly. There's all kinds of reasons that something can come up at the last minute. So, moving on those sooner, knowing that the school has received them and making that one less thing that you have to continue to follow up on can be a really valuable aspect to your peace of mind throughout this process.
I would add too, Christina, that everybody should remember that teachers aren't getting paid extra
Oh,
to do
no.
letters of recommendation, and so it's something they have to squeeze in. And I can't imagine having 50 students come to me the week of the deadline asking for a letter of rec. So something to keep in mind. Isn't it true too that some, for MIT, for example, they want specific letters of rec from specific teachers. So that's something also that students should keep in mind.
Yes, when you're doing your follow up research, school by school, keep an eye out for who they want those letters from in particular, when they're required, when they're optional, which means you can add more if you want to, and really be strategic about who you're asking to make sure that you're fitting all of those required aspects to make sure that you are a considered candidate for that school's application system. Speaking of deadlines, what are some of the earliest application deadlines out there that you can expect? There are a handful of schools that might have deadlines as early as mid October. I know from my own personal experience, my engineering students interested in Texas A&M have an October 15th early action deadline that's specific to that department. And it might be specific to a program, it might be specific to a scholarship, it might just be the school's early decision or early action deadline. But there are a few out there that are as early as October. Otherwise, the more popular early action and early decision deadlines are November 1st, November 15th. Sometimes you get a December 1st. And there are schools that also have 2 rounds of early decision or early action, so you might get a second shot at it later as well. But in terms of the earliest you might be submitting applications, October 15th is one of those early action deadlines that pops up. You also want to be aware that the UC application system, the Cal State application system, they really have windows of when you can start submitting and when you have to have it in by. that open on October 1st. That's the earliest you could submit your UC application. And they usually end around November 30th. This year, they're extending it to December 2nd because of where that fell in terms of the day of the week. But traditionally, October 1st to the end of November is a 2-month window that both UCs and Cal States kind of use for their application cutoff. And you want to make sure that you have that in. And pro tip, I can tell you, you want to make sure you have that in like at least a week sooner than that deadline because the system crashes every year with the number of students that are hopping on last minute trying to get that in. And you don't want to be a part of that technical chaos because then you might be left in a sea of confusion and worry, wondering if the system's going to start operating normally in time for you to make that deadline. Don't be a part of that mess. Make sure you've got your application submitted before that last minute technical difficulty occurs. Kat, do you have any schools that come to mind when you think of like the earliest early action deadlines that are out there?
I think you were right with specifics for programs. There are some schools out there where housing is based on the priority
Mm.
of when you applied. And so that's a really important question to ask the admissions office or to, of course, look on the school website is getting that application in early because it may help you get first priority for housing.
And I feel like that's true in particular, maybe in Texas. Does
Yes,
that sound right?
a lot of students in Texas are getting their applications in August. For some of the more impacted housing situations, usually at the bigger state schools, that's where you're going to find that. But there are some private schools out there that have some housing impaction. And so that's definitely something to look at. I think that for students who are also looking for some of the state scholarships, there's some specific deadlines there. So make sure, I know in Florida they have Bright Futures and things like that. So that's something, make sure that you're aware of any scholarship deadlines. And then really evaluate whether or not early action, early decision, or regular decision is a better choice for you based on where you are in the application process. Do you need to wait for fall semester grades or not? And then make sure that if you're doing early decision, because it is a contractual agreement that that's your first choice school, you would go there in a second and you're okay with whatever financially they're going to give you.
And you mentioned regular decision, so that's for many schools kind of their final cutoff date. So, as I mentioned, for the UCs, the Cal States, that's usually the end of November. Other schools are going to call it in January, in February. There are some schools who describe their admission systems as rolling, which really just means they're going to keep taking applications until they've filled all of their spots. And for more selective schools, that could be sooner than later. For others, they might still be accepting applications in June and July, even leading up to the next school year. So you really want to look into the particulars. And Kat made a good point when she said that there are Texas students getting their applications in August. These are all deadlines, these are all cutoffs, like the last date to get something in. It doesn't mean you have to wait that long. If your applications are ready in August, for many schools, there's a good reason to be submitting it then. Often getting it in sooner does mean that you get a result from that school sooner. So don't hear deadlines and think that you have to wait that long. Just know that those are the official cutoffs for consideration for each of those different situations. Another important deadline aspect to have researched school by school has to do with their financial aid forms. There are two that could come into play. The most common is the FAFSA, and then there's a second called the CSS profile. And when schools ask for these applications, they might want them along with the school application at the same deadline. Otherwise, they often have a financial aid form specific deadline that's shortly after the school application deadline. Truth is, when they get back to you to tell you if you're in or not, they'd like to be also giving you an idea of the financial ramifications of their offer. And so having that financial aid application info is really important for their ability to follow up with that piece. So, if we're applying early, we're going to need to have the financial aid forms in early. And you want to check the school's websites to see, do they want them by the application deadline, or do they have a little bit later deadline that's specific to the FAFSA? Both of these used to open on October 1st. The FAFSA has been undergoing some changes. This year, they have said they'll be doing a soft launch in October and a full launch in December. But for both of these forms, the CSS will open in October, and the FAFSA, whenever it does fully launch, you want to get started as soon as you can. The sooner you get that information to the schools, the sooner they can get you the important details about their costs, about scholarships that they might be offering you, a realistic understanding of what the financial commitment would be. And it never hurts if people are giving out money to be earlier in line for it than later. So, we do recommend that you keep an eye out for the opening of both of those financial aid forms. Tackle them as soon as you have the opportunity, and be mindful of the school specific deadlines that they may have for the financial aid forms that they're asking for.
Too, there's a couple schools that have their own financial aid application to add further
Okay.
complication to the whole process. I know University of Pennsylvania has their own, Loyola Marymount, to help with the FAFSA situation from this past year, created their own as well. So, highly recommend students that you go to the financial aid website of each school because it's not standardized, and there should be a checklist, or under deadlines, it'll list everything that you need. So look out for a possible extra piece just in case the school that you're looking at has it.
Okay, now I want to talk more about those applications I've been referencing, like the Common App and the UC app, and the components that come along with it. Students will often get really focused on filling out the questions and writing those essays, but forget that there's some additional pieces that are expected along with, like those letters of rec, like sending transcripts. So let's talk about those individual applications. And Kat, why don't you tell us more about what students should expect from the main applications they're going to be using?
Sure. So the common application, as Christina mentioned, it's used by hundreds and hundreds of different schools across the country. And that includes big public schools, it includes smaller liberal arts schools, private schools, and everything in between. One of the things that you want to keep in mind is, even though, as Christina said, the school specific questions will refresh on August 1st for each new season. And so that means that if you are a senior going into senior year, that August is when it opens. However, as a sophomore or junior, you can create a Common App account and start filling out the main pieces under the Common App tab, which is your name and your address, the school you go to, testing information, activities, and things like that. And then when the Common App rolls over, you can select that yes, you would like that information to roll over, and then you can do school specific information on August 1st, or the first couple weeks of August. So you can work on this one ahead of time, which is great. The Common App has two components. As I mentioned, the main Common App tab, and that's going to have a couple different sections: a profile section, a family section. There's an education section, an activity section, a writing section. And then some schools also require a courses and grades piece where you enter in your transcript. All of that information goes to each school that you're applying to with the Common App. Under the My Colleges section, each school has its own individual questions. And that's what we say when we mean the school specific questions. That's where you're going to put information about the deadline you're applying for, your major, applying for any special programs maybe that the school has, Sometimes it's on a separate application, but a lot of times it's in the Common App itself. Talk more about that when we get to the arts supplement piece. The recommendations that you will have for each application, you can assign different recommenders to different colleges within the Common App. So that's where you would invite your recommenders into the application in August of your senior year. And then that is also where you will review and submit that application to each of those schools through the Common App. Pretty straightforward. Any additional essays that each school requires will also be in that section of a why this major essay, something zany that they want you to answer. I know University of Georgia last year, and I believe this year as well, has a question about a book that influenced you in your transition from middle school to high school, which is interesting. But it could be also why this school. Typically, those essays can be anywhere from 50 words, 100 words, all the way up to 500. So definitely want to look into those as well. And that's mainly all the components of the Common App. Again, you can start that a little bit earlier, and then you're going to submit to each school individually. State school apps are different. Those are more what are called proprietary, meaning that you can apply to different schools within that state system. Christina mentioned the University of California system, the UC application here in California. You can apply to any or all of the UCs through one application. The California State University application is very similar, where you can apply to any and all Cal States through that one application itself. That one's a little bit different. And with different state systems, they may require different things. So the University of California application requires very similar to the Common App, your profile, family information, the campuses you're applying to, the majors you're applying to, any school specific information. University of California, San Diego has a college system where you're housed together and your gen eds are different depending on the college that you choose. And this is independent of your major. So there's a little bit more research to do there. They also have an activity section where you can put in your, how have you spent your time in high school? And they have essays of their own. They don't like to call them essays, though. They like to call them personal insight questions because they're not written like essays. So that's something to keep in mind. Some state systems do have essays, some do not. Some have activities, some do not. Some require letters of rec, some do not. So look specifically at each of the colleges that you're applying for in your and that website to get familiar with those systems and those applications. A lot of times, the state systems, those will open all at once for all of those campuses. Usually, you cannot start those earlier than that opening date. It's usually August 1st. Private school applications and liberal arts school applications, very similar. A lot of them go through the Common App. Some of them have their own application. I know here in California, California Baptist University has its own application, and they're going to require much like the Common App profile section, more about your family, the major that you're applying to, a bit about how you've spent your time in high school with your activities, and an essay or a statement. They may or may not have letters of recommendation. There may or may not be a portal system where you can track pieces of your application or submit pieces separately. I know with the Biola University application that it's its own system. You can submit the first part of the application and then come back to submit the essay part of that piece. Another school that uses their own application is Georgetown University. You would fill out the Georgetown application that has all of the main pieces. You would submit that first, and then there's a second part to the application that includes the essay portion. So, again, just research with the schools that you're applying to. It's a great idea to know what your list is going to be as early as possible in junior year so that you can start planning accordingly. Military school apps. if you are applying to the U.S. Air Force Academy, if you're applying to West Point or the Naval Academy or any of the military academies, the process is very different. Of course, it is. So you want to start that as early as possible, and you need to make that decision really early in your high school career is highly recommended because there are pieces you're going to want to build in your profile, but that's another entirely different conversation. So, for military school applications, there's a pre candidate questionnaire that you will fill out as early as junior year. Those tend to open around spring before senior year, and that's going to determine your eligibility for even applying. Once that piece is completed, we recommend that you go do the summer program that that academy has to make sure it's a good fit for you. And that application is also due usually in the spring, doing that summer program. Once you're determined that you are eligible to apply, from there, you will want to pursue a congressional nomination. And that process, depending on your congressperson, could be very different, but it often includes a main application, letters of recommendation, a statement, an interview, transcripts, and test scores. Once you move into the candidate phase, there's then going to be a fitness assessment, a medical exam, and an interview. The recruiter from or admissions officer from the academy or your local representative may want to interview with you as well. So there's a lot of different pieces on their own timelines. It's really important if you're looking into the military academies that you do that as soon as possible. Do not be afraid to reach out to the admissions offices there. I found that the admissions offices are very helpful and they really want to give you as much information as possible. Finally, we have art schools or other specialized school applications. And this could be a specialty program in a medical area, like a Bachelor's of Science with a medical doctorate, a BSMD program, or you apply your senior year of high school to get guaranteed a spot in a medical program as long as you're following all of the criteria for that program. This could also be a specialty engineering program, dual degree program. This could be a study abroad, your first year program, an honors college piece to your application, or a scholarship piece. Of course, if you're applying for the arts, theater, visual arts, music, etc., there is most likely going to be an audition or portfolio piece to your application, either within the Common App itself, through the school's specific application and portal, or through something called Slide Room or Accepted. Sometimes these applications in the arts side will have what's called a pre screen, where you will tape yourself with your phone. You will make a video of you performing a piece of music, a monologue, etc. These specifics can be individual per the program. So you want to plan for them well into advance. For visual art students or architecture students, even, you are going to need a portfolio that's based on your work over at least a year, if not more. And so, this is another component that you want to start early because you do not want to try to shove 12 pieces of art into the summer before senior year. For art students, performing art students specifically, I say that you don't want to have just freshly memorized your monologue. You want to be able to perform that piece like you've been doing 8 shows a week for the last 6 months. It's raining outside and you have a little bit of phlegm in your throat and you're not nervous. So, really get started on those pieces really early. These all have varying specifics. Honors colleges can have their own essays, they can have letters of recommendation components. I know that with the BSMD programs or Med Honors programs, there's often an interview component, there's extra essays. There could be a day where you are invited to campus to interview or work with other students on a presentation. There's all sorts of very school and program specific pieces. We highly encourage that you talk to the school, visit the website, and plan for those in advance. Whew. So overall, it's all individualized. There are some standardizations in there, but it's really important, and we cannot emphasize enough that you not start this process a week before applications are due. You really need to plan this out over the course of your high school career. It will make things so much easier and so much less stressful.
And that was a lot of information that we just shared with you. It might have made you aware of how much you don't know at this point. Don't panic, it's okay. I want to take a moment right now just to sort of recap the biggest lessons of all of that information that we shared, like how important it is to be managing your time throughout this process. There will be aspects at the end where you're at the start of your senior year and you've got really challenging classes and you've got your after school activities. It's not the time to be trying to rush and cram things together last second because you want to be thoughtful about the package that you're presenting. So there are things that you can and should be starting before that senior year begins. You can be working on the activity descriptions for the things you know you're going to speak to. You want to be thoughtful about those descriptions. When they ask for a description, they don't need you to explain that tennis is where you take a racket and hit a ball over a net. And if that's not what you're describing, then what are the kinds of things that you should be telling them about your involvement there? You want to be putting time and thought into that, and you can be doing that before the school year starts. You can be working on some of the key essays. We mentioned that the UC system calls them their personal insight questions, and they tend to stay the same year by year. So you could be looking at those options, making choices about which you're going to address, putting together drafts. We mentioned that some schools are going to ask you why you're interested in your major. There's another essay, how you're going to be involved in the community on campus. There are some key themes that show up in prompts, and you could be putting together kind of stock essays before your senior year begins that you then tailor school by school, depending on the application. As I mentioned, you might have already spoken to the writers for your letters of recommendation at the end of your junior year. So you could be preparing a activities resume to share with those writers or any other materials that you're going to be providing them. It would be great to have that before your senior year starts so that when it is time to move, it's just a matter of handing it over and getting them plugged into the system, and you're not starting from scratch at that point. And as we mentioned, there are many applications too that have aspects, if not the entire thing, that you could be working in. You could be taking care of the bulk of the Common App tab that's asking about your address and your birth date and your testing and those kinds of generic pieces of information that everybody wants to know. You could be plugging that info in before that August 1st rollover. So there's a lot that you could get a head start on for those things that you're going to be asking others to help you with, like your letters of recommendation. You really want to make sure you're being respectful, giving them the time that they need to address it. You want to give them time to work on it. You want to plan time to stop in and remind them in case they haven't started, or remind them when they've finished but they just need to hit submit. So build in those check-ins in your time frame when you're moving on those. And you also want to think about those busiest times of year. We know homecoming means all of our seniors are going to be hard to pin down. What else do you have going on in those first couple of months of your senior year that are around the time that the Common App rolls over? That's around the time that the UC application can be submitted. What do you need to work on in advance? What do you need to plan for so that you're able to still do all of those great things that you're a part of, so that you're accommodating that busy schedule and not stressing yourself out during that time. And the truth is, if you do get a head start, if you have drafts going well in advance, then you can reach that next level of thought and edit for your work where you're tailoring what you're saying to the individual schools that you're applying to. Kat is a master at this, so I'm going to let her speak to what this looks like for students. But it's another factor that you want to try to make sure you have time for. Kat, tell us more about tailoring our applications.
We get the question all the time, what do colleges want? And I wanted you to get that out of your head. Parents, if you're listening, help your student talk through what are their best qualities and why is this school in particular a good fit for them. Now, when I talk about best qualities, we don't want to talk about hardworking, determined, and I persevere. That may be true, but it doesn't mean anything. You want to assign specific instances that show me that you're a hard worker. Don't just tell me you're a hard worker. So you want to think ahead as to what are your specific qualities? What makes you stand out from your friend group or in your family or at your school or in your community? And then how can you communicate the best of those in your application? Specifically, well, when they ask me why this school, I don't know. I want to get a college degree and I want to get a good job. What else do you want me to say? You don't want to mention weather, the campus, how pretty it is, how famous all the professors are, go team. Okay. What you really want to do is determine what are your non negotiables? What do you want out of your 4 years? And how does that school match those values? The school has a mission, vision, and values for what they're hoping to teach their students. How are you going to take advantage of that? And that's something that you can talk to the school about. What specifics makes this a good fit for you? Now, if it's the fact that you do want to stay closer to home so that you can help out with a family member, definitely say that. But don't just say, I've always loved the California sunshine, and you guys have small class sizes and a great program, and go team. Everybody says that. That doesn't tell me anything about you, and it doesn't show me that you've actually seen yourself here. What are you going to do here? I'm not even sure. So be genuine, be authentic, but you need to identify first and foremost, what do you bring to the campus community? Why is this a good fit school for you? And then communicate that back to the schools. Again, be authentic, especially with your activities. Another piece that we always get asked is this good for college applications? Um, we can tell when students have built a resume for quote unquote college applications. I did this because it's good on college applications. And I'm guilty of this. This is exactly why I did some of the clubs that I did in high school because I was told by the adults it looks great on college applications. But it didn't do anything there. It's not deep. It used to be that colleges want well-rounded students, but they want students from all different walks of life and backgrounds and interests. So be genuine, right? Join things that you're genuinely excited about. There's no magic formula, unfortunately. If there were, like we could guarantee everything. You really want to think about what's genuine to you, but then also how are you building your skills to be successful in the area that you want to study? What have you done to investigate to make sure that this is the area that you want to study, for example? All of your grades, your classes, your activities, and essays should form a cohesive narrative about you. I should be able to walk away from your application and identify what makes you unique. What are you going to add to my campus? How are you going to fit into my freshman class? Don't just throw everything and anything at the wall. Don't put that random one off 3 hours you spent volunteering for the jogathon because you heard that colleges want community service. No. This includes like independent things, though. A lot of students don't realize that you are spending your time doing things that build your application. A great example of this, and he won't mind that I'm mentioning this, is my little brother. My little brother actually did competitive gaming back when competitive gaming was the most socially unacceptable thing that you could be doing with your time in high school, and won money doing it, being on these teams, and paid for part of college and was flown all over the world for his gaming team, sponsored by companies. Because it wasn't a sanctioned school activity, quote unquote, he never would have listed that in his applications. But it was such a huge component of how he spent his time. I mean, he would spend hours writing letters for sponsorships for his team. He would spend hours back when you had to like network your computers together with cables. But it's not a school sanctioned activity, so he never would have included it, but he should have. Luckily, he had a big sister that made him include that in his applications. So you really want to make sure that you're representing all of who you are, but I should see threads connecting things together in your application, if at all possible. If you are a Renaissance man or woman, meaning that you do a whole bunch of different things just because you like learning, there's your thread. It doesn't have to be this painstakingly and out curated thread. You just love learning and make sure that you mention that. I love learning. Here's all the things that I have gained experience in. So you do want to be strategic about your applications. You don't want to just slap something together at the last minute. You don't want to just fill something out because you should fill it out. You really need to put time and thought into this. And I think that a lot of people don't realize how many hours it takes to put together a great application that represents the student. I would say easily, with essays, activities, planning, and everything else, you're looking at a dozen hours or more. So that's something to keep in mind as you're planning as well. This should start much earlier than a lot of students start, which is usually October, November of senior year.
All right, that's some great advice from a pretty seasoned professional in the field, kid. So I hope you're taking notes or going back and re listening and taking notes on the most important aspects of what you learned today. That's all for this episode. If you'd like to contact Kat or myself directly, you can send admissions questions to info@mymarchconsulting.com. And if you'd like a free college planning consultation, you can go to our website, mymarchconsulting.com/services to schedule that. This has been the College Checklist Podcast with Christina and Kat. See you next time, and thanks for listening.